Today, we're jumping into something really fascinating, actually sparked by you, our listener.
That's right.
You've pointed us towards, well, quite a stack of intriguing sources, everything from that Netflix series people are discussing to some pretty radical scientific theories and, those ancient mysteries that just won't go away.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is kind of like being detectives, really. We want to piece together the most compelling evidence, look at the alternative viewpoints being presented about, well, a potential lost, advanced civilization.
And what really jumps out from these sources almost immediately is this huge question, isn't it? Could there actually be a major missing chapter in the human story?
Exactly.
The idea that a sophisticated civilization might have existed and then, poof, wiped out by some cataclysm. It really forces you to re-examine everything we thought we knew about the past.
It really does. And the names Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, they keep cropping up in these discussions, don't they? They seem to be the ones really pushing against the mainstream historical story.
Yeah, their work is sort of central to a lot of this. It gives us a framework for what we need to explore.
Okay, so let's dive straight into maybe the biggest piece of this alternative puzzle. The Younger Dryas impact theory. This idea of a massive ancient catastrophe.
Right.
For anyone who isn't quite up to speed, what exactly was the Younger Dryas?
Okay, so the Younger Dryas, it was this period, relatively short in geological terms, but intense, a sudden return to near glacial conditions. It lasted about 1,200 years.
Okay.
Roughly 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. It just slammed the brakes on the warming trend that was happening at the end of the last ice age. Very abrupt.
And this impact theory, that's the idea that something from space, a comet or something, kicked this whole thing off.
Precisely. The theory, which really started getting attention around, 2007, it suggests that not just one, but multiple comet impacts around 12,800 years ago were, the main trigger for this massive global upheaval.
Multiple impacts. Okay. And what kind of evidence actually backs that up? I mean, it sounds pretty dramatic. What makes people take this Younger Dryas impact theory seriously?
Well, it's interesting. There's quite a range of evidence they point to. Things like nanodiamonds, these tiny, tiny diamonds formed under, incredible pressure and heat.
Like an impact would generate.
Exactly. Then you've got melted quartz, which needs temperatures over 2,000 degrees Celsius, and also unusual spikes in iridium. That's an element much more common in asteroids and comets than here on Earth's crust.
Right.
And all these markers, they're found concentrated in this specific geological layer, the Younger Dryas boundary layer.
Ah, the boundary layer. So like a geological fingerprint marking the start of that cold snap.
Exactly. And the key thing is, this layer with these markers, it's found all over the place. North America, Syria, other sites too. It's hard to explain that kind of global signature with just, volcanoes or something purely Earth-based.
It does make you think about things like Tunguska back in 1908.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison, actually. Tunguska, that was probably an object maybe 100 meters across, exploding in the atmosphere over Siberia.
And it flattened thousands of square miles of forest, didn't it?
Something like 2,000 square miles, yeah. So that gives us a sort of modern, albeit much smaller, taste of what can happen when Earth runs into space debris. Especially, considering we pass through the Torid meteor stream twice a year, June and November.
Okay, so Tunguska was relatively small, just an airburst, and caused all that damage. If we scale that up for the Younger Dryas with multiple impacts.
Exactly. The theory isn't just one hit. It's potentially many impacts. Some researchers, like Sir Fred Hoyle, even explored the idea of an ocean impact. That could have thrown vast amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere, possibly contributing to later warming effects, too.
Wow. So thousands of Tunguska-level events. I mean, the scale of destruction is almost impossible to grasp. One source we looked at compared it to, full-scale nuclear war.
And that really drives home the potential magnitude, doesn't it? If you even entertain the possibility of a cataclysm that big, well, it naturally makes you question the standard timeline we have for human civilization.
Right, because the usual story is, civilization really gets going around 6,000 years ago. Mesopotamia, Egypt, but then you've got places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Göbekli Tepe, yes. That site is it's incredible, and it completely messes with that neat timeline. It's dated to about 11,600 years old.
11,600 years.
Yeah, so it predates the supposed earliest megalithic sites like Stonehenge or the pyramids by, 5,000 years? And it's huge, complex, possibly the largest megalithic site on Earth, and much of it isn't even dug up yet.
And the standard thinking is you need farming first, right?
Yeah.
Surplus food, settle populations, and you can build something like that. But Göbekli Tepe seems to just ignore that rule book.
Totally. It looks like it was built by people we typically call hunter-gatherers, which is just mind-blowing from an archaeological perspective. And then, maybe 1,000 years later, they deliberately buried the whole thing. Why? How? Archaeology is still really grappling with it. It forces us to ask, was farming really the only path to complexity?
Which brings us right to that core idea, doesn't it? This concept of a lost, maybe even advanced civilization. One that existed before this Younger Dryas event. That's a big part of Graham Hancock's work, right?
That's a central thesis, yeah.
Yeah.
Explored in books like Fingerprints of the Gods. The idea is that this Younger Dryas cataclysm might have just wiped the slate clean, destroying a globally distributed civilization that had reached a pretty significant level. So maybe we're not looking at a smooth, continuous rise of civilization, but maybe a reset.
And it's not just Göbekli Tepe, is it? There are other bits of evidence that seem to slot into this picture.
Yeah, definitely. Like the sudden disappearance of the Clovis culture in North America.
Right, the mammoth hunters.
Exactly. They vanish right around 12,800 years ago, bang, on the start of the Younger Dryas. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's suggestive. And then you have these underwater discoveries.
Like the one in the Sicily Channel.
Yeah, that megalithic site, underwater, dated to at least 9,000 years old. It points to the fact that sea levels rose massively after the Ice Age, about 400 feet.
400 feet? That's huge.
It really is. Think about the amount of land that drowned. Some estimates say it's an area comparable to Europe and China combined, all now underwater. And marine archaeology, well, it's mostly focused on shipwrecks, not necessarily searching for submerged settlements from, 12,000 years ago.
So vast amounts of potential evidence could just be lost beneath the waves.
Exactly. Or, maybe deliberately destroyed over the millennia, too.
Yeah.
It makes piecing together that deep past incredibly difficult.
It definitely paints a compelling, if fragmented, picture. But as our sources make clear, these ideas face a lot of pushback from, let's say, mainstream archaeology and history.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really crucial part of the story here. Proponents of the impact theory or the lost civilization idea, they often face, significant skepticism, sometimes outright dismissal.
Yeah, the sources mention accusations flying around, pseudoscience, fraud, even liar. Sometimes, it seems, without really engaging directly with the evidence being put forward.
It's interesting. There's definitely a sense highlighted in one source of gatekeeping, a kind of resistance to letting these alternative ideas get too much traction, maybe. The example given was Graham Hancock's Wikipedia page being locked down, supposedly controlled by a specific group. It suggests a real battle over the narrative.
You can almost understand it to a degree. It feels defensive, like protecting established theories, maybe protecting careers built on those theories. Paradigm shifts are never easy in science, are they?
No, they rarely are. Now, shifting gears a little but still connected, is this fascinating angle in the sources linking a potential lost civilization to shamanism and altered states of consciousness.
Right, the idea that psychedelics might have been really central to their culture, their creativity, how they saw the world.
Yes, and what's striking is how this is becoming less fringe. There's growing mainstream acceptance of psychedelic use in ancient cultures. That Harvard study, for example, finding traces in ancient wine vessels. It suggests these substances were maybe more integrated than we used to think.
And the potential impact. The sources draw this link between what psychedelics do kind of break down rigid thinking and how that could have fueled innovation or shifts in ancient societies.
It's a powerful idea. And it connects to the work of people like Dennis and Terence McKenna. Terence's book, Food of the Gods, specifically proposed that maybe encounters with psychedelics actually helped kickstart human consciousness evolution.
Wow. And the implication then is that maybe our modern taboo around these substances is actually cutting us off from understanding a really important part of our own heritage.
That's the argument, yes. A kind of self-inflicted amnesia. Though, it's worth noting, we are seeing a resurgence in mainstream research now. Psilocybin for PTSD, for example. And that DMT research at Imperial College London is particularly interesting.
That's the work looking into those entity encounters people report on DMT.
Exactly. And what's really wild is the consistency. People reporting strikingly similar encounters, these complex entities, even when they haven't compared notes. It raises huge questions about consciousness, reality, stuff Rick Strassman was exploring years ago, too.
It really blurs the lines, doesn't it, between inner and outer reality. One source even connected this to things like alleged ET abduction stories, suggesting maybe consciousness is the key, and different cultures just interpret these fundamental experiences, fairies, spirits, ETs, through their own lenses.
Yeah, the book Supernatural digs into that, how culture shapes the interpretation of these, well, frankly, weird experiences. Now, stepping back a bit from consciousness and impacts, the sources also touch on disease and just the sheer loss of knowledge.
Right, like smallpox in the Americas. The devastation caused by European diseases, maybe even more than warfare, wiping out huge percentages of the indigenous population.
A catastrophic loss of life, and with it, a catastrophic loss of knowledge, of culture, of history, a kind of species amnesia, as one source put it. And then add to that the deliberate destruction, like the Spanish burning Mayan books. Codices full of who knows what knowledge.
It's heartbreaking to think about. It makes you look at our own era with the internet. One source called it a poison chalice, which feels about right.
Yeah, incredible access to information, but also just awash in misinformation, anger, noise.
Still, it has opened up ways for people to connect and share ideas, like these alternative history theories, in ways that just weren't possible before.
True. It's definitely a double-edged sword. It also makes you think about how vulnerable isolated past civilizations might have been. No global communication network, no early warning systems.
Which brings us to thinking about the future and planetary defense. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That we might actually be the first civilization on Earth capable of doing something about potential future impacts.
Yeah, and yet, look at the funding priorities. The sources point out the huge gap between military spending and what gets allocated to space watch programs, basically scanning the skies for threats. It seems like a potentially dangerous misprioritization. We probably need a global effort on this.
Absolutely. And it ties into understanding Earth's own cycles, too, not just space threats, like climate change.
Exactly. The Greenland ice cores show massive temperature swings happening long before industrialization. It doesn't mean humans aren't impacting climate now, of course, but it shows we need to understand the powerful natural drivers, too. Earth is part of a bigger cosmic system.
Okay, let's circle back to some of that really dramatic geological evidence, those enormous floods in the Pacific Northwest.
Ah, yes, the megafloods. The evidence of them is now pretty much accepted, but boy, did it face resistance initially. You have to credit J. Harlan Bretz for sticking to his guns about the Missoula floods.
Right, and the current thinking is multiple floods from this glacial Lake Missoula.
That's the standard view now, multiple outburst floods.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the Younger Dryas impact theory could provide a mechanism for a single, truly enormous flood event if an impact rapidly melted a huge chunk of the ice sheet. We're talking unimaginable volumes of water.
The sources use terms like spherules, right? 1 million cubic meters per second.
Yeah, it's staggering. Like all the world's rivers combined, maybe times 10 or more, flowing across the landscape.
And the evidence is literally carved into the land.
Absolutely. Giant current ripples 50 feet high, hundreds of feet long in places like the Camas Prairie. Huge boulders, erratics weighing thousands of tons, moved hundreds of miles by icebergs caught in the floodwaters, and Dry Falls Cataract, 5 miles wide. Just picture Niagara Falls, but dwarfing it completely. That was carved out by this flood.
It's amazing how water erosion looks similar at different scales, like patterns on a beach versus these giant flood features.
Exactly. Scale and variance. You see these vast channels, the coulees, cutting across the landscape. Oversized river valleys like the Missouri, far too big for the rivers in them now. They're relics of these megafloods. Even finding massive potholes, like drilled into bedrock along the St. Croix River, suggesting incredible flows lasting for weeks.
And what was that about rainfall of mud?
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. Ancient traditions from different parts of the world mention this strange black bituminous rain falling from the sky, potentially linked to the atmospheric chaos after a major impact event, throwing dust and soot high into the atmosphere.
Wow. It really does feel like these threads, the geology, the myths, the potential lost civilization might actually connect. Which brings us, finally, to the Sphinx.
Ah, the Sphinx. Always controversial. The main challenge to the standard date, around 2500 BC, Egyptologists assign it, comes from the erosion patterns.
Specifically water erosion, right?
Yeah.
Not just wind and sand.
Exactly. Geologists like Robert Schuck, building on John Anthony West's work, argued the deep vertical fissures on the Sphinx and its enclosure wall look much more like erosion caused by heavy rainfall over a long period.
Rainfall that Egypt didn't really have in 2500 BC, but did have much earlier, back around the end of the Ice Age, maybe 9000 BC or even into the Younger Dryas period itself.
Precisely. That's the core of the geological argument for a much older Sphinx. And remember that old counter-argument. If the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, where are the other sites from that time?
Yeah, but now we have Göbekli Tepe.
Exactly. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe and potentially other sites yet to be fully understood or found really undermines that particular objection. It opens the door to the possibility that the Sphinx could be much, much older.
It really makes you step back and think, what else are we missing? This whole deep dive, prompted by the material you sent us, it really underscores how much our understanding of our own history might be incomplete. The possibility of a sophisticated civilization lost to cataclysm. It's profound.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the crucial thing, I think, is just to keep an open mind. Discovery is always happening. We have to be willing to look at new evidence, even, maybe especially, when it challenges the stories we've always told ourselves about the past. Our understanding is definitely not finished.
It leaves you with a pretty big thought, doesn't it? If our picture of the deep past is this potentially flawed, how does that change how we see ourselves now? And maybe our future, especially facing things like cosmic hazards, the need for cooperation. What other knowledge might be buried back there, waiting to be rediscovered, that could actually help us now?
Absolutely. For anyone wanting to dig deeper, the sources you shared point towards Graham Hancock's website, the Comet Research Group's work. There's a lot more information out there if you're curious. Plenty to explore.